Chapter 1. The Call and the Mirror. You didn't arrive at these words through the ordinary channels of conscious choice. Something far deeper orchestrated this convergence, a force Jung spent his lifetime mapping. The self, that transcendent organizing principle at the core of your being. While your ego consciousness went about its daily routines, the self was already positioning the pieces, arranging synchronicities, weaving the invisible threads that would bring you to this precise moment of recognition. The symptoms have been accumulating, haven't they? Dreams that wake you at 3 a.m. with your heart pounding, carrying images too vivid to dismiss, yet too cryptic to fully decode. That peculiar heaviness that settles over your chest when you're around certain people. Not anxiety exactly, but something older, more primal. The way silence has become less empty and more pregnant with meaning, as if the spaces between words contain messages your conscious mind hasn't learned to read yet. These are not random neurological events. They are the self's alarm system, honed across millennia of human evolution, sounding warnings in the only language that bypasses the ego's defensive structures. What you're experiencing is what Jung termed the confrontation with the shadow, but with a devastating twist. This isn't your shadow you're wrestling with. It's someone else's unintegrated darkness attempting to colonize your psychological territory. The person occupying your thoughts right now, yes, that specific individual whose face appeared in your mind's eye the moment you began reading. They are not who their carefully constructed persona suggests. Beneath the social mask they wear with such practiced ease lies a cauldron of unprocessed material. Envy that eats at them like acid, manipulation refined through years of unconscious practice, a desperate hunger for control masquerading as care. Between the 150th and 250th word of our journey together, I must pause to offer you something concrete, something I mapped out specifically for souls navigating this treacherous terrain. This is why I created the 3 keys to a prosperous life. A trilogy of practical wisdom, ebook and audiobook, designed specifically for chosen ones who are ready to awaken their fullest potential without drowning in the guilt that so often accompanies our gifts. It's not theory, it's the distilled essence of what works for old souls, trying to thrive in a world that wasn't built for our frequency. The link waits for you in the pinned comment below, a blueprint I left for those ready to stop merely surviving and start truly living. But for now, let's return to the urgent matter at hand. Your spirit, that aspect of your being that exists beyond the ego's narrow concerns and the persona's social performances, has been crying out for weeks, perhaps months. You questioned yourself, didn't you? Wondered if you were becoming paranoid, if your intuition had finally crossed the line into pathology. The rational mind, that eager servant of the ego, kept offering explanations: stress, overwork, imagination. But Jung taught us something the modern world has forgotten. The psyche possesses an intelligence that operates independent of conscious reasoning. Your gut feelings, those bodily sensations that defy logic, those persistent dreams, they weren't malfunctions. They were your psyche's early warning system, detecting a threat your conscious mind couldn't yet name. The imago Dei burns within you. This is not religious hyperbole, but psychological fact. Jung observed that within every human psyche exists an archetype of the divine, a God image that serves as the ultimate pattern of wholeness. In chosen ones, this pattern manifests with unusual clarity and intensity. You carry what the mystics called anointing, and Jung termed numinosity, a quality of being touched by something transcendent that marks you as fundamentally different. This isn't about superiority, it's about function. Some souls incarnate as bridges between the unconscious and conscious realms, translators of archetypal energies into human experience. You are one of these souls, whether you've claimed this identity or not. And this numinous quality you carry, it acts like a psychological tuning fork. When you enter a room, You activate what's dormant in others, both their capacity for healing and their unintegrated shadow material. Most people exist in a kind of psychological slumber, their ego consciousness skating across the surface of life, never plunging into the depths where the real work of individuation occurs. Your mere presence disturbs this comfortable sleep. For those ready to awaken, you become a catalyst for their own journey. For those invested in remaining unconscious, you become a threat that must be neutralized. This person circling your orbit right now embodies the latter category. They approach with warmth, speak words dipped in honey, present themselves as ally or friend. But beneath this carefully maintained exterior, their unconscious churns with a very different agenda. Jung identified this pattern repeatedly in his clinical work. The negative animus in women or negative anima in men. That destructive inner voice that, when projected outward, seeks not connection but conquest, not understanding but domination. This person doesn't want to join your journey. They want to access your light so they can either siphon it for themselves or extinguish it entirely. The mechanics of this predation are subtle, almost invisible to the untrained eye. They study you, not with the genuine curiosity of authentic interest, but with the calculating gaze of a strategist mapping vulnerabilities. They ask questions designed to extract information, your plans, your insecurities, your next moves. They listen to your dreams and aspirations with apparent support while simultaneously filing away every detail as ammunition for future use. In public, they speak well of you. This is crucial for maintaining their persona, the acceptable face they show the world. But behind closed doors, when the mask can safely drop, their words transform into something unrecognizable. They twist your intentions, reframe your gifts as flaws, plant seeds of doubt about you in the minds of others. This is the shadow's methodology. It cannot create, so it must corrupt. It cannot generate light, so it must steal or extinguish it. Unable to face its own darkness, it projects that darkness onto others, seeing in them the very qualities it refuses to acknowledge in itself. Jung called this projection, perhaps his most important discovery, and it's the root of almost all human conflict. When someone has not done their shadow work, when they refuse to integrate their own darkness, that darkness doesn't disappear. Instead, it gets split off from consciousness and projected onto the external world, where it appears to live in other people. You, chosen one, have become this person's projection screen. They see in you what they cannot face in themselves, power they're afraid to claim, authenticity they're terrified to embody, a connection to something greater they've spent their life denying. And rather than letting your example inspire them toward their own individuation, they've chosen the shadow's path, sabotage, undermining, the slow poisoning of your peace. But here's what they don't understand, what Jung spent decades trying to teach. The self protects those committed to wholeness. Not every connection serves individuation. Some relationships are genuine encounters that catalyze mutual growth. Others are projections that teach us about our own unintegrated material. And some, like this one, are outright sabotage attempts by forces that cannot bear to witness authentic transformation. The self, that divine organizing principle at your core, has a defensive function. When you commit to the individuation process, when you say yes to becoming your truest, most integrated self, the self begins arranging protective measures. It's not mysticism, it's the psyche's self-regulating function asserting itself. Chapter 2, the shadow work and resistance. The resistance you're feeling right now, that hesitation to fully believe what your deeper knowing is telling you. This is where we must focus our analytical lens with brutal honesty. Why do you doubt your own perception? Why, even as every cell in your body screams warning, does your conscious mind keep crafting explanations that excuse, rationalize, or minimize the danger? This is not weakness. This is the ego's survival mechanism, encountering information that threatens to shatter its carefully constructed worldview. Jung understood that the ego, that fragile sense of I we identify with, desperately needs to believe the world is predictable and people are fundamentally good. This belief system isn't naive, it's protective. If we walked through life constantly vigilant for psychological predators, we'd never form connections, never trust, never open ourselves to the vulnerability that genuine intimacy requires. So the ego develops what we might call positive bias, a tendency to interpret ambiguous signals in the most charitable light possible. This serves us well in most circumstances, but it becomes dangerous when we encounter those rare individuals who have fully identified with their shadow, who have made an unconscious decision to harm rather than heal. The person you're thinking of represents something Jung termed the dark brother or dark sister, the shadow figure who appears in dreams and myths as the protagonist's evil twin or corrupted companion. This archetype isn't about literal evil, but about what happens when someone refuses the individuation journey entirely. They see you doing the work, they're too frightened to attempt, and rather than being inspired, they're enraged. Your commitment to authenticity mirrors back their commitment to pretense. Your willingness to face your shadow highlights their refusal to acknowledge theirs. You become a living reminder of the path they've rejected, and for that, you must be punished. But here's the truly insidious part, the mechanism that keeps you doubting your own knowing. They've studied the language of spiritual growth. They speak in terms of energy, alignment, higher purpose. They may even reference Jung, mindfulness, or other legitimate paths of development. This is what makes the predation so difficult to detect. They've learned to mimic the external forms of consciousness while remaining completely unconscious of their actual motivations. Jung had a term for this, inflation, when someone identifies with an archetype rather than integrating it, when they confuse the ego with the self and consequently develop a God complex that justifies any behavior. Your resistance to seeing this clearly isn't accidental. It's the ego's last-ditch effort to maintain the illusion of safety. Because if you fully accept what your deeper psyche is telling you, that someone you trusted is actually an agent of fragmentation, you must then confront a terrifying reality. You've been fooled. Your discernment, which you pride yourself on as a chosen one, failed you, or so the ego believes. But this is where Jung's wisdom becomes crucial. Discernment isn't about never being deceived. It's about how quickly you recognize the deception and how decisively you act once the truth becomes undeniable. The shadow figure in your life right now carries what Jung called a complex, an autonomous psychological structure with its own energy, its own agenda, its own intelligence. The betrayal complex or envy complex isn't just a personality trait. It's an entire sub-personality that takes control during certain circumstances. When you're in this person's presence, you're not dealing with their conscious ego. You're encountering this complex directly, and it's this complex that registers as off to your sensitive psyche. Your gut feelings aren't responding to their words or actions, but to the unconscious material radiating from this activated complex. And here's what makes this particularly dangerous for chosen ones. You've been conditioned by your empathic nature to extend endless grace, to see the wounded child behind every aggressive adult, to excuse harmful behavior as unhealed trauma. This isn't wrong, it's often accurate. But Jung taught that compassion without boundaries is psychological suicide. Yes, this person carries wounds. Yes, their shadow behavior likely stems from their own unprocessed trauma. But your role is not to sacrifice yourself on the altar of their healing. You are not the therapist they need. You are the light they're trying to extinguish. The guilt you feel at the thought of walking away. Let's examine this with unflinching honesty. Where does this guilt originate? It's not from your authentic self, which knows its own value and protects its own boundaries. This guilt comes from a distorted complex Jung identified, particularly in empaths and healers. The wounded healer complex gone toxic. You've internalized the belief that your worth depends on your ability to save, fix, or redeem others. This belief is killing you slowly, draining your life force, preventing your own individuation from reaching completion. Jung worked with countless patients who confused their healing gift with an obligation to heal everyone, regardless of whether those people wanted healing or were actively working against it. He learned to distinguish between the wounded healer, someone who has transmuted their own suffering into compassion and wisdom, and the wounded savior, someone who compulsively sacrifices themselves to avoid facing their own unintegrated material. The question you must ask yourself with brutal honesty: am I staying in this connection because it serves my growth, or because walking away would force me to confront my own fear of being not enough? This person knows your weak points because you've shown them, not foolishly, but because you operated under the assumption that vulnerability would deepen the connection. You didn't realize you were dealing with someone who weaponizes vulnerability rather than honoring it. Every insecurity you shared, every dream you revealed, every fear you confessed, these weren't received as sacred trusts but catalogued as exploitable weaknesses. This is how the shadow operates when completely unintegrated. It takes what should be bridges to intimacy and transforms them into instruments of control. The woman behind the scenes, because there often is one, isn't there? Jung observed that shadow operations frequently involve what he called the negative mother, not necessarily a biological mother, but a maternal figure who has identified entirely with the devouring aspect of the mother archetype. This is Kali without the redemption, Medusa without the wisdom. She whispers poison because she herself is poisoned by envy, so ancient she no longer remembers a time before it consumed her. She sees your light and it burns her because she long ago extinguished her own. So she works through proxies, through those weak enough to be her instruments, orchestrating sabotage from the shadows. But your psyche already knew this. That's what those dreams were showing you. The dreams where you couldn't see the face of the threat, where danger approached wearing familiar features, where betrayal came from expected quarters. The unconscious speaks in symbols precisely because the conscious mind would reject the information if delivered directly. You had to be prepared gradually, through dreams, through bodily sensations, through those moments where time seemed to slow and you saw, just for an instant, the mask slip and something cold and hungry stare out from behind your betrayer's eyes. The imposter syndrome you've been battling, let's name it clearly. It's not yours, it's a psychic infection, transmitted through what Jung termed participation mystique, that dangerous blurring of boundaries where you begin absorbing another's unconscious material as if it were your own. This person's self-doubt, their deep unconscious belief in their own unworthiness, has been leaking into your psychic field every time you interact. You absorb it because you're sensitive, because your boundaries have been too porous, because you were trained to believe that boundaries equal coldness. But Jung made this crystal clear. Differentiation is not separation. Knowing where you end and another begins isn't lack of love. It's the prerequisite for genuine love. The self-sabotage patterns that have mysteriously intensified lately, the missed opportunities, the sudden hesitations before breakthroughs, the inexplicable fog that descends when you're on the verge of success. These aren't character flaws. They're the result of psychic attack. Not in the supernatural sense necessarily, though Jung never dismissed that possibility, but in the very real sense that another's unconscious shadow can impact your energy field when you haven't adequately protected it. Their envy, their desire for your failure, their need to see you diminished. These thoughts and feelings have weight, have energy, and when directed consistently at someone as sensitive as you, they create interference patterns in your own psyche. You've been fighting with one hand tied behind your back, trying to accomplish your soul's mission while simultaneously processing the toxic projections being dumped into your field by someone you trusted. No wonder you're exhausted. No wonder doubt has crept in. No wonder the path forward has seemed obscured. You've been attempting individuation while carrying another's shadow, and that's simply not possible. The resistance to accepting this truth, that final hesitation before full acknowledgement, comes from your highest values being weaponized against you. You value loyalty, so walking away feels like betrayal. You value compassion, so protecting yourself feels like cruelty. You value transformation, so giving up on this connection feels like admitting defeat. But Jung would ask you, whose transformation are you responsible for? The answer is singular and non-negotiable: your own. You cannot individuate for another person. You cannot do their shadow work. You cannot force someone to face what they're determined to keep unconscious. Chapter 3. Synchronicities and the Language of the Universe. The signs have been accumulating with increasing urgency, haven't they? Those repeating numbers that catch your eye at precisely the moment you're thinking about this person. 11, 11, 3, 33, numbers that carry numerological weight in mystical traditions, but which Jung understood as manifestations of what he called synchronicity. This wasn't mysticism for Jung. It was a scientific observation of how the psyche operates when approaching critical thresholds of transformation. Synchronicities cluster around periods of individuation acceleration, appearing as the collective unconscious's way of confirming that you're on the right track, that the path you're sensing is the path you should follow. But there's a darker corollary Jung also observed, what we might term anti-synchronicities, those uncanny convergences that feel meaningful but carry warning rather than encouragement. The way this person's name keeps appearing just before something goes wrong. The dreams where their face morphs into shadow. The physical sensations, that tightening in your solar plexus. That sudden chill despite warm surroundings, that arise whenever they're mentioned or appear. These aren't paranormal phenomena in the supernatural sense. They're your organism's evolved capacity for threat detection operating at a level below conscious awareness. Jung spent years studying what he termed the objective psyche, the layer of consciousness that exists beyond personal experience, connecting us to ancestral wisdom and species-level knowledge. Your body carries within its cells the accumulated experience of countless generations who survived by developing exquisite sensitivity to danger. That gut feeling you've been having? It's not mere emotion. It's your nervous system accessing data from micro-expressions you consciously missed. Tonal variations in their voice, your ears registered but your conscious mind dismissed. Energetic inconsistencies between their words and their authentic state that your limbic system detected even as your neocortex crafted rationalizations. The collective unconscious speaks through what Jung termed the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to synthesize conscious and unconscious information into emergent wisdom. You knew something was wrong long before you could articulate what or why. This knowing appeared first in dreams. Perhaps you dreamt of snakes with familiar faces, of trusted companions leading you toward cliff edges, of masks that when removed revealed nothing underneath. These weren't random neurological firings during REM sleep. They were the unconscious mind processing data your conscious awareness couldn't yet accept, preparing you gradually for a revelation that, delivered suddenly, might shatter your ego's coherence entirely. Then came the bodily symptoms. After spending time with this person, you'd feel inexplicably drained, as if something had been siphoned from your energy field. Jung termed this psychic contagion, the way one person's unintegrated shadow can literally deplete another's vitality. Not metaphorically, but measurably. You'd leave their presence needing to sleep, to withdraw, to cleanse yourself in ways that made no logical sense. Because your body knew before your mind accepted, you were encountering psychological vampirism, the attempt by an unconscious person to feed off the life force of someone who has cultivated genuine connection to the self. The truth about synchronicity that most spiritual teachers miss is this: it's not always pleasant. Sometimes the collective unconscious arranges events not to encourage, but to warn, not to open paths, but to close them definitively before you wander too far down a road that leads only to fragmentation. The coincidences surrounding this person, the way opportunities collapse when you include them, the way conflicts arise inexplicably when they're involved, the way your usually clear intuition becomes muddied in their presence. These aren't obstacles to overcome. They're the universe's way, the collective unconscious's method of creating what Jung called a numinous experience, an encounter with the sacred that forces transformation whether the ego consents or not. But the most disturbing truth, and I say this not to frighten but to liberate, is that this person knows, on some level, what they're doing. Not consciously necessarily, though sometimes there's more conscious awareness than we want to believe. But the shadow itself possesses an intelligence, a cunning that operates beneath the threshold of ego awareness. This is why their manipulations have been so effective. They're not crude or obvious. They're precisely calibrated to exploit your specific vulnerabilities, designed with an almost artistic precision that comes from the shadow's deep, unconscious understanding of human psychology. They know you're sensitive to rejection, so they deploy intermittent reinforcement, periods of warmth followed by sudden coldness, keeping you psychologically off balance, always seeking to return to their good graces. They know you value authenticity, so they share carefully curated vulnerabilities designed to make you feel you're seeing their true self when you're actually witnessing another performance. They know you're drawn to potential, so they present themselves as wounded healers in progress, people who just need one more chance, one more patient witness to their transformation. But Jung taught us to observe behavior, not intentions. And their behavior, when you strip away the explanatory narratives, reveals a consistent pattern of taking while giving only enough to keep you engaged. The dreams have been escalating, haven't they? The unconscious doesn't wait for permission to speak. When the message is urgent enough, it screams. You've been dreaming of locked doors, of running through molasses, of arriving late to crucial appointments. These aren't anxiety dreams. They're the psyche's way of showing you that something or someone is obstructing your individuation. The specific image patterns matter. If you dream of being watched, it reflects the reality of their surveillance of you. If you dream of theft, it mirrors the theft of your energy, your ideas, your peace. If you dream of masks or mirrors, the unconscious is highlighting the persona versus shadow split in this person's psyche. Jung kept detailed records of his patients' dreams and discovered something remarkable. When someone is approaching a necessary but difficult life transition, the unconscious begins preparing them months in advance. Your dreams about betrayal, about danger wearing friendly faces, about needing to run but finding yourself paralyzed. These weren't premonitions of a future event. They were the unconscious's gradual process of bringing to conscious awareness what it had already recognized, that this person represents a threat to your continued psychological development. The synchronicities around this relationship have included what Jung termed trickster energy, those moments where things fall apart in almost comical ways, where the universe seems to be playing a joke. Plans with this person collapse at the last minute. Technology fails when you're communicating. You keep forgetting to respond to their messages. The ego interprets these as coincidences or your own self-sabotage. But Jung would recognize them as the self's interference, the psyche's self-protective function creating obstacles because the conscious mind hasn't yet accepted what the unconscious already knows. Animals have featured in your awareness lately, haven't they? Perhaps you've noticed ravens or crows appearing repeatedly. Those creatures Jung associated with transformation through death and rebirth. Or perhaps dogs, symbols of loyalty, appearing to remind you what authentic fidelity looks like. The collective unconscious speaks through the natural world because that's our original language, the symbolic system we understood long before words. When animals appear synchronistically, they're not random. They're messengers from the deeper layers of psyche, carrying archetypal wisdom about your current situation. But the synchronicity most people miss is this: the fact that you're reading these words right now. You think you found this content through an algorithm or a random search. But Jung would say there's no such thing as random when it comes to psychological development. The self orchestrates encounters with information, people, and experiences that serve individuation. You weren't ready for this message a month ago. Your ego would have rejected it. You're ready now because the preparation work, done through dreams, through bodily sensations, through those whispers of intuition you kept dismissing, has reached completion. The seed planted in your unconscious has finally broken through to conscious soil. The patterns in your relationship with this person mirror patterns from your past, because the psyche always seeks to resolve unfinished business. Jung termed this repetition compulsion, the tendency to recreate painful situations until we finally learn the lesson embedded within them. Perhaps this person reminds you, in subtle ways, of a parent who withheld approval, a sibling who couldn't celebrate your success, an early friend who betrayed your trust. The unconscious arranged this encounter not to punish you, but to give you another opportunity to choose differently, to honor your knowing instead of overriding it, to protect yourself instead of sacrificing yourself. The meaningful coincidences extend to your career, your creative work, your very mission as a chosen one. You've noticed, haven't you, how certain opportunities seem to appear and then mysteriously evaporate when this person becomes involved. How projects lose momentum when you discuss them with them. How your creative flow dries up after spending time in their energy field. These aren't coincidences. These are the observe,